Anna, the woman I loved for 10 years, but when I saw her enjoying being pressed down by my brother on the sofa, my chest ached so much that I couldn't breathe, and the last bit of attachment to her in my heart completely collapsed. This time I saw it with my own eyes instead of hearing it. I couldn't play the fool anymore, and I slapped her hard. I didn't hesitate anymore and immediately froze her credit card, quickly recovered all the money invested in her father's company, and immediately canceled our grand wedding next week. She came to my office angrily, with her head held high and her eyes cold. "Lucas, unless you kneel down and apologize to me now, and give me a supercar worth 12 million as compensation, otherwise, you will lose me in the future." I suppressed my anger and asked the security to kick her out. Then I personally announced the cancellation of the wedding in front of the reporters. In the following week, she called me frantically, but I refused to answer. Not long after, she appeared at the door of my villa in a drunken state, with fatigue and despair in her eyes. "Lucas, I know I was wrong. Let's start over." Chapter 1. Dark Villa. "Anna, put on your clothes and get out." I returned to my father's villa after work, but saw my brother and his fiancée hugging and kissing. My voice trembled slightly with anger. The two people on the sofa separated immediately, and my brother Adam picked her up and gently put her on the ground with a triumphant smile on his face. "Calm down, brother. Don't get me wrong." Adam shrugged innocently and explained lightly. Anna said her shoulders were sore. I was just giving her a massage to help her relieve it. He pushed her towards me. The smile on his face deepened, and his tone was a little provocative. "Lucas, you're not really angry, are you? She is my future sister-in-law. I take such good care of her, and she is enjoying it. Don't you have to thank me?" Her lips were covered with mottled lipstick marks, and the sight hurt my eyes. Anger and humiliation intertwined into unspeakable pain. Adam, the son of my father and his mistress, has been trying to challenge my position in everything since he was brought into this family. His grades were not as good as mine since he was a child, so he was very dissatisfied. Now, not only does he want to fight for the family assets, he even covets my fiancée. "Why don't you get out of here?" I said coldly. Anna was drunk but still leaned on me and defended him. "Lucas, don't be so harsh. We didn't do anything. If you keep doing this, I'm going to ignore you." Adam smiled, even more arrogantly. He slowly took out a bunch of new car keys from his pocket, waved them in front of me, and pressed the button. "Then I'll be leaving first, brother. By the way, thank you for this new car you gave Anna. I really like it." He deliberately emphasized the word like with an unignorable ambiguity. Of course, I knew what he meant. I didn't want my father to come back and laugh at us, so I chose to leave. I dragged Anna into the car, started the engine without saying a word, and drove out of the garage at high speed. She was a little confused and leaned on the seat, half awake and half awake, saying, "Adam is very pitiful. He has been through so much, and now he finally has a family. Can't you be nicer to him?" Her words were like a needle that pierced my mind. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. She actually spoke for the son who destroyed my mother. "Lucas," her voice became cold and commanding. "Bring him to the company and let him learn from you. If you don't want to, there's no need to talk about the wedding anymore." The sound of brakes cut through the night. I slammed the car to the side of the road and turned my head to look at her. Adam's existence was a pain that my mother could never heal. He made her suffer in bed day after day, and eventually she passed away. But 3 months later, my father brought him back home and made him part of the family in the true sense of the word. Anna clearly knew all this, yet she still dared to force me like this? Of her and Adam on the sofa echoing in my mind, the betrayal was sickening. I moved closer to her and saw that her pale, slender legs tensed slightly, obviously frightened by my action. However, I just unbuckled her seatbelt and pointed to the door. "Get out of the car, Anna. Our wedding is canceled. I will pack your things and send them to you. Now, please go back to your home." She opened her eyes slightly, as if she couldn't believe I would do this. But I didn't want to look at her again, and I felt a sense of relief in my heart. The car door closed behind her, and I looked forward with a cold look. In the past 10 years, I have loved her, spoiled her, and thought she was my whole world. But she is no longer the pure girl in my memory. Chapter 2. She leaned back in her seat, the corners of her mouth slightly raised, revealing that mocking smile that I was all too familiar with. Her voice soft and mean. "Lucas, are you jealous of Adam? This is childish." Her voice was like a thorn, piercing my heart. I stared at the sapphire necklace on her neck, which was the most precious relic of my mother. Now, it hung quietly around her neck, shiny and gorgeous, yet looking particularly ironic. This necklace is worth at least $1 million, and it was supposed to be a gift from my mother to my wife. But now, Anna has used my credit card to spend lavishly, buying brand-name clothes and luxury cars, and even gave Adam an $800,000 sports car without hesitation. Her reasoning was to help me make up for Adam's missing life over the years. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I silently opened the car door, got out, walked around to the passenger seat, and pulled her out of the seat. She was obviously startled by my action, and her eyes widened. "What are you doing?" Without saying a word, I reached out and took off the necklace from her neck. The cold gem rolled in my palm, making my heart cold and hard. "This necklace is for my wife," I said calmly, but with suppressed anger. "Since we are not getting married, I certainly have the right to take it back." Anna was stunned for a moment, as if she couldn't believe that I would really do this. I let go of her, stood up straight, and continued. "The wedding is canceled. I will ask the public relations team to make an announcement. I will find someone to pack your things and send them to you." Her expression remained indifferent, without a trace of emotion on her face, as if she had expected me to do this. "I'll call you a taxi." I turned and waved at her, my tone decisive. "You go now." She stood there, raised her chin slightly, her face cold as ice. "Lucas, I hope you don't regret what you said today. Tomorrow you will kneel down and beg me to go back." I stopped and looked at her. There was no sadness in her eyes, only that kind of elusive arrogance and provocation. "If you ever want to see me again, get down on your knees and apologize." Her voice was low and lazy, as if I was just a chess piece that she could play with at any time. After saying that, she raised her hand to stop a taxi and got in without looking back. The night wind blew through the empty streets, and I stood there, watching her car drive away. My fingers were tightly clenched around the sapphire necklace, and my fingertips were slightly white. Chapter 3. The next day, my father asked me to go home. As soon as I entered the door, I saw the disgusting scene. Adam was kneeling at his father's feet, massaging him diligently with his hands, with a weird smile on his lips. "Dad, Lucas is back." Adam looked up at me. The red hand marks on his face were particularly glaring. He pretended to be innocent and said with a bit of grievance in his voice, "Don't blame him. He really didn't hit me yesterday. I accidentally fell and got this wound on my face." After saying that, his eyes quickly changed, full of provocation, and then he gave me a hypocritical smile. "Brother, I'm sorry. What happened between you and Anna is all because of me. It's all my fault. But how could you treat her like this and leave her on the side of the road?" I sneered, thinking that he was really cruel to himself. The red handprint was clearly left by him on purpose. He was acting in full force, and he had mastered the skill to perfection. My father's face immediately turned red. He stood up suddenly and walked towards me, shouting, "Lucas, how much do you hate your brother that you hit him? He has suffered so much. Why did you treat him like this? Apologize to him immediately. Otherwise, I will treat you as if I didn't have a son." Adam stood behind him, raised his eyebrows, moved his lips slightly, and silently said 2 words to me: "Loser." I took a step forward angrily and punched him in the face without hesitation. He stumbled and fell to the ground, looking up in embarrassment. "You want me to apologize? Stand up and give me a chance to hit you, then I might consider it." A trace of fear flashed in Adam's eyes, but he immediately pretended to be scared with a trembling voice. "Brother, don't hit me. I really don't know what I did wrong. I was wrong, okay? I apologize." My father completely exploded. He rushed over with Adam in his arms and punched me. "Asshole, if you touch him again, I'm calling the police." He held Adam in his arms and comforted him like a wounded child. "Don't cry, Adam. Daddy will solve everything for you. Tell me what you want, and I will give it to you." Chapter 4. Adam's face was pale. He leaned in his father's arms, tears and snot all over his face, crying like a mess. I stood there, clenching my fists, but the anger in my heart was extinguished little by the feeling of powerlessness. I had long since seen enough of this meaningless farce. I grabbed my coat from the sofa, threw it aside, and walked out. As the night fell on the streets of New York, I walked aimlessly until my inner restlessness subsided a little. I finally chose to go back to the office. The company's headquarters is in the financial district, and the lights at night spilling through the glass curtain walls make it look particularly lonely. When I pushed open the door of the office, I saw a small figure under the light, Angela. She had a loose bun on her hair and was sitting at the desk, her fingers flying on the keyboard. As she typed, tears rolled down her cheeks, and her red nose revealed a hint of helplessness that made people feel distressed. I cleared my throat. She jumped up from her chair in shock, wiped away her tears in a hurry, and looked up at me. "Mr. Lucas? Why are you still here?" I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 10:30 at night. "Pack your things and go home. I'll ask the driver to take you there." She sobbed and sniffed, as if she wanted to refute something, but then she whispered, "Okay." I didn't say anything else and turned back to my office. Sitting down on the sofa, I untied my tie, leaned against the backrest tiredly, picked up my phone, and a series of unread messages came into view. "Father, don't go too far. Do you think you can get more inheritance by bullying your innocent brother? As long as I am alive, he will always be the person I care about most. Adam, brother, you hit me so hard. Anna just came to see me. She is in my room now. Do you want me to open a video for you?" I turned off my phone coldly. Ironically, I was hospitalized for gastric bleeding due to excessive drinking, and even when I was almost dead, Anna never came to see me. But Adam always made her so caring. Ridiculous. Suddenly, there was a light knock on the door. Angela poked her head in, her face slightly red, holding a small cake in her hand. "Mr. Lucas, I heard that today is your birthday." She walked over slowly and placed the cake on the table. "This cake was originally my midnight snack, but now it's for you. Happy birthday." I was stunned. Today was indeed my birthday, and I always thought that the lunar birthday was too troublesome, so I only celebrated the solar birthday in recent years. But I thought no one would remember. I looked at the small cake. The candles were lit by her, and the flickering flames illuminated her expectant face. "Make a wish." I stared at the candles silently, and suddenly remembered that every year in the past, I wished to be with Anna forever. But this year, I don't want to mention her name anymore. Just as I was about to speak, my cell phone suddenly rang, that ringtone that I was all too familiar with. "It's Anna." I knew what she was going to say, and I knew her pride wouldn't let her hit me a second time. I didn't answer. I looked at Angela, who stood up uneasily and asked in a low voice, "Mr. Lucas, did I do something wrong?" I shook my head slowly, my eyes locked on her. "Go home and pack your bags. You will go on a business trip with me tomorrow." Angela was stunned, blinking at me, as if she couldn't believe it. "Me? On a business trip?" "Yes, be ready." She nodded cautiously, a slight blush on her face. Chapter 5. I remember this girl. Late one night a few months ago, I was sitting alone in the office and drank too much. I became so confused that I fell asleep. When I woke up, my head was resting on a pair of soft, slender legs. I blinked and looked up and saw a pair of bright, big eyes staring at me cautiously, with cat-like vigilance and innocence. She was still holding her phone and seemed to be doing something. I woke up instantly, sat up abruptly, and almost subconsciously shouted, "What are you doing? Delete the photos in your phone." She was startled by me, shook her head, and explained in a panic. "I didn't take a photo, I just—" But my mind was in a mess at the time, and I couldn't listen at all, so I interrupted her directly, "Resign and pay for the losses. I'll give you $1 million and leave now." She was so anxious that her face turned pale and tears were about to fall, but I didn't even give her a chance to explain and directly called the Human Resources Department. It was not until the next day that I heard what had happened from my assistant. That night, I was drunk and mistook her for Anna. She didn't take any pictures at all, but she was afraid that something might happen to me after drinking, so she stayed to take care of me. She ordered breakfast for me and sat there, watching me cautiously, until I woke up. I even remember that when she left, I insisted on giving her the 1 million yuan in compensation, but she just blushed and shook her head, saying firmly, "I didn't do anything. I don't need the money." It was only at that moment that I realized how wrong I was. She was just an intern, and I accused her without any reason, but she never complained. Eventually, I was able to get her back and have HR reassign her back to the company. Tonight, when I saw her red and swollen eyes and her frantic typing at the keyboard alone at her desk, my brows furrowed. The stubborn girl who never wanted to show weakness was obviously troubled by something. "Who asked you to stay and work overtime?" When she heard my voice, she looked up in surprise and quickly wiped away her tears. "No, no." She sniffed and answered in a low voice. I was silent for a moment, then walked to her desk and said calmly, but firmly, "Don't worry about it. Pack your things and go home. You'll go on a business trip with me tomorrow." She looked up at me, with a hint of surprise and confusion in her eyes. "Business trip?" I nodded, and said in a tone that brooked no refusal, "You are responsible for arranging the itinerary. Don't be late." She was stunned for a moment, then an inexplicable happiness appeared on her face slightly red, and she whispered, "Okay." I walked back to the office and saw her back through the glass as she was busy organizing documents. This girl is much stronger than I thought. Chapter 6. The next morning, all the news headlines were blowing up. Billionaire Lucas Stone cancels wedding. Fiancée Anna appears to be abandoned. Lucas and mysterious assistant show up at airport. Lucas and Anna's wedding of the century falls through. I sat in the car, watching the news flashing on my phone, my face calm. Outside the car window, the JFK International Airport was crowded with people, and the announcements of early flights were heard one after another. When we walked into the departure hall, Angela trotted after me, dragging her suitcase. She was wearing a simple beige suit, and her steps were obviously a little flustered. The area waiting to board the flight was soon blocked by reporters. They seemed to be coming from all directions, each holding a microphone or camera in their hands. Angela was frightened by the scene and subconsciously hid behind me, grabbed my arm, and curled up into a ball. "Mr. Lucas." A reporter broke through the crowd and asked the first question, his voice sharp and urgent. "You and Miss Anna's wedding was suddenly canceled. Is it because you found a new love? What is your relationship with this assistant?" Other reporters rushed over immediately, their camera lenses almost touching my face. Angela's fingers clenched tighter and tighter, and I could feel her fingertips trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, glanced coldly at the camera, stretched out my hand to protect Angela, and said directly, "I'm tired." A simple word made the originally noisy hall suddenly quiet for a moment. The reporters looked at each other in bewilderment, and then asked more frantically, "What do you mean by tired? Are you disappointed with Miss Anna? Or—" I ignored them and walked straight to the boarding gate. Angela trotted after me, with a complicated look on her face, as if she was touched by what I just said, but was too embarrassed to ask. After boarding the plane, I leaned back in my seat and dozed off with my eyes closed, but my brain couldn't stop working. Tired. This word was not said casually. Over the past 10 years, Anna and I have had countless arguments. Her willfulness, suspicion, and crazy possessiveness were like a big net that trapped me. And I always persuaded myself to forgive her again and continue this relationship that had long been out of control. But in the end, I caught nothing. I'm tired, really tired. I'm tired of myself becoming a stranger in order to please her and keep her. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, the first thing I did was turn on my phone. Countless messages popped up, but one call stood out. Anna. I hesitated for a moment and finally pressed the answer button. "Lucas, what do you mean by tired?" There was a slight tremor in her voice on the other end of the line. She was no longer as aggressive as usual, but rather a little uneasy. I didn't say anything but looked out the window at the airport runway in the distance. "Lucas, don't play dumb. Bring that girl here right now and explain everything." Her voice suddenly became sharp with a hint of crazy control. I held the phone tightly, and after a moment of silence, I responded calmly. "There is nothing to explain about this matter." Chapter 7. My voice was as cold as a biting chill. "Don't shout. It's annoying." Did you think I was joking when I said that? There was silence on the other end of the phone for a moment, and Anna's voice immediately lowered a few notches, with a hint of disbelief. "Lucas, you said my voice is annoying?" I leaned against the French window of the hotel room, overlooking the neon lights of Los Angeles at night, with a sneer on my lips. "Yeah, it's annoying. And do you know what you were doing? You promised to marry me, and I promised to give you a grand wedding. But what about you?" Her breathing became heavier, with a hint of panic. "What do you mean? Who is that woman in the news? Did you deliberately bring her to the media just to irritate me?" "Lucas, you know what this means to me." I asked her back. "Do you know what you did? When you were in the car with Adam that day, you sat on his lap, grabbed the back of his head, and kissed him madly." My tone became sharp and decisive, and every word cut into her disguise like a knife. "Anna, did you forget that we were about to get married? You make me sick." There was dead silence on the other end of the phone, so I hung up and blacklisted her number. This time, I had no hesitation and no pain. I sat back on the sofa and took a deep breath. The room was dimly lit, with only the city lights outside the window shining in. After every quarrel, I would feel a suffocating pain, but this time was different. After saying that, I hung up the call and threw the phone back on the seat. Angela was sitting next to me. She obviously noticed my expression, hesitated for a moment, and asked in a low voice, "Is it her?" I turned my head and glanced at her with a faint smile on my lips. "Don't worry about her." She didn't ask any more questions, but nodded and looked down at the itinerary schedule in her hand, as if she was trying to pretend that she didn't hear the call just now. A slight knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. "Angela," I responded calmly. The door was gently pushed open, and she poked her head in, holding the strap of her bag tightly with both hands. She looked a little embarrassed. Lucas, I have some vision problems and sometimes tinnitus." Her tone was cautious, and she looked at me anxiously, as if she was afraid that I would criticize her for being unprofessional. I glanced at her and didn't say much. There was a flash of panic in her eyes, but she tried to hide it and smiled as if to change the subject. "By the way, Mr. Lucas, can you tell me about the itinerary this time? I can make arrangements in advance." I picked up a piece of paper on the table and handed her the address and contact information. "There is no specific itinerary. This business trip is to find a suitable nursing home for my father." She took the note and nodded, seeming relieved. "Okay, I'll be ready." I walked to the window and opened the curtains. The night enveloped the entire city, and there was an illusory tranquility among the lights of thousands of homes. Suddenly, I thought of Adam, the clown who did whatever it took to please his father, whose life was full of drama and elaborate performances. A few minutes ago, an update popped up on social media. I opened my phone and saw his latest updates. In one photo, Adam and his father were sitting in the sun drinking tea. They were smiling very intimately, with their faces close together almost deliberately. The caption is, "After so many years of wandering, I finally have time to enjoy some quality father-son time. So happy." I sneered and turned off the phone screen. He is really a natural actor, good at using tears and those sensational words to gain sympathy. But does he really think that he can compete with me with just these? What can be changed through this kind of performance? I shook my head, feeling a little sarcastic. Chapter 8. Things were settled quickly, but I was not in a hurry to return to New York. "Mr. Lucas, I have a special event planned for you." Angela handed me the itinerary with a smile, her tone revealing her undisguised excitement. I took it and looked at it. Skydiving? On the plane, she was wearing simple sportswear. Her hair was messy due to the wind, but her face was full of eager smile. "Mr. Lucas, if you are afraid, don't push yourself." When she said this, two shallow dimples appeared on her cheeks, and her eyes were bright and warm. I looked up at the sky outside the cabin. My heart was beating wildly for no reason, and the whistling of the wind in my ears made me feel a little scared. Before Mingming, I was fearless. During those years when I was crazy about Anna, whenever she let me down, I would participate in high-speed racing, challenge my limits, and numb myself with the danger of speed and death. And in those moments close to death, I never backed down. But now, I don't even dare to jump from a height of 10,000 meters. It turns out, I have always been afraid, but I just didn't realize it. Angela noticed the cold sweat on my forehead, frowned slightly, and gently wiped it off for me with her little hand. "Wait a minute, I'll go talk to the staff." She turned around and said a few words to the skydiving instructor, and the activity was temporarily canceled. We sat on a bench on the hotel's private beach, and the sunset in the sky dyed the sea orange. I picked up the drink and apologized softly. "Sorry to ruin your mood." Angela blew her nose and puffed her cheeks, looking like a sulking child. "It's okay. I'll keep your secret. There's really nothing to be ashamed of being afraid of heights. But choosing to say no doesn't mean giving up on dreams, love, or what you want." She raised her head, her eyes clear and sincere. "Sometimes we stop to protect ourselves and to protect something more important." Her voice was soft and light, like a breeze, but it struck my heart. I reached out and rubbed her hair. She subconsciously raised her hand and grabbed my hand. Her fingertips touched my skin, which was slightly cool and soft. Her face suddenly turned red, and her ears were tinged with crimson. She quickly let go of my hand and lowered her eyes, not daring to look at me. At that moment, the faint fragrance from her body lingered around me, making me slightly dazed. After returning to New York, I stood at the door of her office, watching her packing up her documents, and couldn't help asking, "Angela, are you still willing to continue to be my assistant?" She shook her little head quickly, like a child who was afraid of making mistakes. "Mr. Lucas, I'm not really suitable. I can't bear it if Anna misunderstands." As she said that, she smiled at me, turned, and walked out. There was a hint of sadness in her smile, but it was extremely firm. I didn't try to keep her and just watch her leave, feeling a mix of emotions in my heart. Perhaps she is the only one who can see my true appearance, but only I know that shadow of the past, and others will not easily believe it. Chapter 9. When I returned to the company, I had only been away for a few days when I discovered that Adam had found a position. When I pushed open the door to the conference room, I saw Adam sitting in the front row, looking proud and confident. Under the lights, he looked like a model on a catwalk, while Anna stood next to him, wearing a neatly tailored black jacket and a pair of sparkling diamond earrings. She smiled and seemed to enjoy being in the spotlight. The whole place fell silent, and everyone stood up as if to welcome a new boss. I sneered, stood at the door, and glanced at them. Adam raised his head, and when he saw me, the smile on his face froze slightly, but he quickly walked over to me, pretending to be calm, and said, "Brother, don't be angry. It was Dad who insisted on letting me join the company and asked Anna to teach me how to manage the business so that I can help you share the work." His tone was respectful, but his expression contained a hint of obvious provocation. I put my hands in the pockets of my suit pants and glanced at him calmly. "Sharing the work? With your body that is so fragile that you can't even get out of bed?" Adam's face turned pale, his lips trembled slightly, and tears welled up in his eyes. "Brother, if you want to scold me, just do it. If it makes you feel better, I'm willing to bear it." Anna frowned, her tone blaming. "That's enough, Lucas. How long are you going to bully him? Last time you slapped him, he had a headache for 3 days, and you didn't even say a word of concern." She walked over and pulled Adam into her arms, as if she was protecting a wounded animal. Watching this scene, I just felt extremely ironic. Anna was actually interested in this kind of person, a man who played the weak role and cried forever. I sneered and pulled Adam out of her arms. "Everyone get out. I want to talk to him alone." Anna hesitated for a moment, glared at me, and finally left the meeting room with everyone else. After the door closed, Adam stood up again, shook his shoulders, and smiled smugly. "Honestly, this hurts, right? Anna cares about me more now. If she ends up marrying me, will you go crazy?" I looked at him, my eyes darkened, and my voice was as cold as ice. "And then? Do you still want to tell me that Dad also agrees to give you the company's shares?" Adam smiled even more deeply and continued to provoke. "Yeah, when I married your first love, you didn't even have the face to stay in this company, right?" I couldn't bear it any longer, so I grabbed him by the collar and punched him in the face mercilessly. "If you bark again, I will let you know what the real consequences are." Adam was knocked to the ground, with a trace of blood flowing from the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were still full of provocation. "Lucas, you can't win anything." I clenched my fists, my eyes sharp as a knife. This brother didn't even know who he was provoking. Chapter 10. I opened the door of the conference room and saw that there were already people outside. They were whispering in twos and threes, holding their cell phones high in their hands, with unfriendly lights flashing on the screens. I glanced at them coldly, and the air became silent as if frozen until Anna rushed over. She grabbed my arm, her eyes filled with anger and anxiety. "Lucas, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this?" Adam fell to the ground, covering his face with his hands, sobbing. His voice was mournful and trembling, and he pretended to shout, "I don't know what I did wrong. He is simply crazy. He suddenly started to beat me." I turned to look at Anna, and the expression on her face was as cold as ice. "You have to protect him, right?" I said in a dry voice with a hint of self-mockery in my tone. Anna sighed and took a tissue to wipe the blood from the corner of Adam's mouth. Her eyes did not waver at all. "Lucas, you have to apologize this time." "Apologize?" I sat back in my chair, looking exhausted, and shook my head with a sneer. I didn't say anything. I just glanced at them, turned around, and strode out of the meeting room. I walked out of the office and called the Human Resources Department directly. "Fire Anna. Withdraw all investments in Adam. And withdraw all investments in Anna S. father. Also notify the security guards that if they let the two of them step into our company again, you will all be fired." After hanging up the phone, I stood on the steps outside the building and lit a cigarette. In the smoke, I seemed to see my tired shadow. When did the originally clear goal and persistent persistence turn into a joke? A familiar figure suddenly came into view. Angela came out of the building, holding a pile of documents in her arms, and her steps were a little staggering. She lowered her head, like a kitten drenched in rain, with a frustrated look on her face. "What's going on?" I walked up and asked. She raised her head suddenly, her eyes filled with grievance and anger. "You're still asking me? Your fiancé kicked me out. It's all your fault." She pursed her lips, tears welling up in her eyes, as if she was acting coquettishly, but also as if she was accusing someone. I couldn't help laughing, threw away the cigarette butt, and patted her head gently. Don't leave. She has no right to fire you now. It was my good brother who recruited her while I was away. Angela was stunned. A hint of doubt flashed in her eyes, but she finally nodded slightly. Chapter 11. In the evening, Angela invited me to a barbecue restaurant to thank me. She handed me the menu, and I casually ordered a dozen cold beers. The waiter came over, glanced at us, and said with a smile, "We have a couples event. Just take a photo, hold hands, or kiss, and you can get a free drink." Angela looked up at me, curled her lips, and muttered softly, "We are not a couple." The waiter turned to me and winked. "Holding hands is also okay. Do you want to try it?" Without hesitation, I reached out and held Angela's hand. Her hands were soft and slightly cold. She looked up at me with wide eyes, as if she was frightened by my sudden action. Snap! The waiter quickly took a photo, handed us an instant photo, and shouted with a smile, "Couple at table 9, here's your free beer." Angela's ears turned red instantly. She quickly pulled her hand back, lowered her head, and poked the barbecue on the plate with chopsticks. Her eyes flickered, and she avoided my sight. "Eat it," I said, putting the meat she had just put on my plate into my mouth. She was silent for a moment, then gently poured me a glass of beer. We didn't say much throughout the meal, but the silence was surprisingly comfortable. It was like two friends who had known each other for a long time, sitting together for a meal, and they didn't feel awkward even if they didn't talk. When I finished my fourth beer, Angela reached out and snatched my cup, shook her head, and muttered, "No, you'll get drunk if you drink anymore." Her expression was so adorably serious that I couldn't help but smile. After dinner, I asked the driver to take her home. She stood by the car door, pursed her lips, and hummed twice. But before getting on the bus, she looked back at me several times. There was something hidden in those clear eyes, like happiness and reluctance. When I got home, the lights in the house were on. Anna was sitting on the sofa, already asleep, her head tilted to one side, her long hair hanging down, covering her face. The sound of the door closing woke her up. She rubbed her eyes, looked up at me, and said in a hoarse voice, "Where have you been?" I took off my coat and headed straight for the bathroom, not bothering to answer her. As expected, she caught up with me, grabbed my collar, and forced me to stop. "Lucas, tell me, are you serious about that woman?" There was anger and a little panic in her eyes. I looked at her coldly and said angrily, "Get lost." Chapter 12. Anna's voice was as cold as ice. "You are awesome, Lucas." She threw a photo in my face, and the photo fell to the ground and stopped at my feet. It was a photo of Angela and me. My brows furrowed, and I glanced at the photo. It was obvious that she had gone through my clothes last night. I stood there with a cold look in my eyes. "What are you looking through my clothes for?" Anna's face flashed with madness. She bit her lip and said in an accusing voice, "I have loved you for 10 years, Lucas, and you dare to hold another woman's hand? You betrayed me so easily." Betray? These two words were like needles piercing my heart, making me feel absurd for no apparent reason. I sneered, bent down, and picked up the photo. "I like her." This sentence is not only said to her, but more like what I said to myself. Anna froze in place, her face instantly pale. She rushed forward in panic, wrapped her arms around my waist, and slid her fingers along the hem of my shirt. The cold touch made me frown. "Come on, Anna." I took her wrist and pushed her hand away from me. "It's over." She looked at me, her eyes filled with anger and fear, like a cheetah forced to the edge of a cliff. After a moment's silence, she staggered back to the bedroom door. "Stay." Her voice was almost pleading. I ignored her, picked up my coat, and prepared to leave. My shoes made a dull sound on the floor. Anna leaned against the bedroom door, arms crossed, eyes cold and stubborn. "Lucas, I will do everything you want. I will delete the things you don't like, and even if you hate Adam, I will make him disappear from your life." She paused for a moment, her voice so low that it was almost inaudible. "Fire that woman, and we'll get married as planned, okay?" Marry. The scene I had imagined came to my mind. The luxurious wedding, the warm life after marriage, and even the name of our future child. But now, when I heard this proposal again, I felt only a deep exhaustion and desolation. Anna noticed my silence and suddenly moved closer to me, pressing her soft body against mine. She put her arms around my neck and said in a low and charming voice, "Lucas, I know you still love me, right?" Her lips moved closer, and I subconsciously turned my head away from her. She froze in place, her expression awkward and stubborn. She turned my face hard, with a hint of madness in her eyes. Look at me, Lucas. You love me, right? Chapter 13. I couldn't bear it anymore and pushed her away. Anna, what do you want? She staggered back, her back hitting the wall, her lips bitten, her eyes bloodshot. I took out my phone, opened the photo album, slid my fingertips across the screen, and finally stopped at the video that I had watched countless times. In the picture, she and Adam were sitting in the car, the lights were dim, her body was pressed tightly against him, and their shadows were entangled. I have long been numb from watching this video, but every time I replay it, it still cuts through the softest part of my heart like a sharp blade. I handed the phone to her and said in a terribly cold voice, "Is this your way of comforting him?" Anna's hands trembled slightly as she took the phone. She only glanced at it and her face turned pale instantly. Her fingers pressed the delete key uncontrollably. "This is not what you think, Lucas. He cried that day and said that you didn't care about him. I just wanted to comfort him." Comfort him? I scoffed. Does comforting him require you to lower your voice and hold him? Does it require you to do those things? Her eyes dodged and her voice was weak. I didn't mean to do that. I don't know how things turn out like that. She suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist, like a drowning person grabbing the last straw, her eyes full of fear and panic. "Lucas, don't go. I was wrong. I was really wrong." She suddenly stood on tiptoe and kissed me madly, her lips falling on my cheek, chin, and neck with a madness that was almost desperate. I raised my hands, ready to shake her off, but froze when I saw that she had her eyes closed, waiting for me to hit her. She raised her face slightly, and tears silently slid down and dripped onto the back of my hand. I took a deep breath, grabbed her arm fiercely, and dragged her out the door. "Get out! I never want to see you again." I slammed the door shut, blocking out her crying and the tangled past. I took a shower, put on my headphones, leaned on the bed, and closed my eyes tiredly. The next morning, when I opened the door, I saw Anna still squatting there. Her hair was disheveled, and she looked haggard. When she looked up at me, there was a kind of heart-pounding persistence in her eyes. I ignored her and walked straight to the parking lot. When I arrived at the company, the entire floor had not yet fully woken up, and only a light in the corner was still on. I walked over and saw Angela holding her chin, staring at the computer screen with dull eyes. "What are you thinking about?" I asked in a low voice. She was startled and stood up hastily like a startled cat. She frantically searched for documents on the table and finally pulled out a report and handed it to me. "Good morning, Lucas. This is your report." Her face was as red as a ripe apple. I took the file and raised my hand to signal her to follow me into the office. In the office, I pulled out a chair and sat down, opened her report, and flipped through a few pages casually. The overall structure is good, except for the beginning, middle, and end, which are not so good. She was stunned, her cheeks puffed up slightly, like a scolded child, and said in a low voice, "I'll change it again." I closed the folder and said in a deliberately serious tone, "No need to change it." She raised her head, her face full of surprise, her brows slightly frowned. "What? You're not suited to this job." She was stunned for a moment, and then she stood up straight angrily. "Okay, I understand. I will write my resignation letter right away." I looked at her face puffed up with anger and couldn't help but laugh. "I have a job that is more suitable for you." She was stunned and looked at me suspiciously. "What job?" I reached out and pinched her cheek, feeling her soft skin. "Be my girlfriend." The air seemed to freeze. Angela's eyes widened, as if she suspected she had heard it wrong, and even her breathing stopped. Before she could react, I gently pulled her into my arms and whispered in her ear. I said, "Be my girlfriend." Her body trembled slightly, but in the end, she did not push me away. Instead, she slowly leaned her head on my shoulder. I could feel her rapid heartbeat and the faint fragrance from her breath. Bah! With a loud bang, the office door was kicked open. I frowned and looked up and saw my father rushing in aggressively, holding the pretentious Adam in his hand. "Lucas!" He pointed at me, his face livid, his voice filled with anger. "You ungrateful boy." Angela suddenly broke free from my arms. Her face flushed to her ears, and she stood aside awkwardly, her little hands nervously clutching the hem of her skirt. I just leaned back in my chair, a faint smile on my lips, and scanned everything in front of me coldly. "What's going on?" Adam lowered his head, with a faked grievance on his face, but a hint of pride in his eyes. He stood behind his father, like a puppy hiding at his master's feet. "What's going on?" My father's finger almost touched the tip of my nose. "I gave you so many chances. But you pushed your own brother to death. Are you still a human being? Angela looked at me nervously and asked in a low voice, Do you want me to go out? Stay, I said calmly and glanced at my father and Adam with a cold look. This is my company. Don't act your drama here. The atmosphere froze instantly. Adam looked up at me, his lips slightly raised, and said with a half smile, Lucas, I just wanted to help you relieve your work pressure, but you treated me like this. Don't you have something to hide? Me? I sneered, stood up, and walked in front of them, looking down at him. Do you want to remind me how my mother died, or do you want me to play another video for everyone to recall? Adam's face froze instantly, his eyes flickered, and his face turned pale. The father roared and stepped forward. Shut up, Lucas. I haven't done anything to you for all these years. How dare you do this to your family? I looked him straight in the face and said coldly, When did you consider me a family member? The air was terribly quiet. Even the sound of breathing became clear. Angela looked at me with worry in her eyes, but my eyes never stayed on my father's and Adam's faces for too long. Take him away, I said lightly. After today, don't let me see him again. Lucas, you, get out. I interrupted my father's roar and looked at both of them coldly, my tone so cold that there was no warmth at all. Chapter 15. Lucas, you want to send me to a nursing home abroad? I'd rather die. My father's roar exploded in the office, making my temples throb. Several security guards hurriedly followed behind, making awkward apologies, as if they could calm this out-of-control situation. I took a deep breath, pinched my brows, and said in a cold tone, Dad, why are you doing this? This company was founded by my grandfather. And what about you? Mom divorced you before she died. Adam, who was lying on the ground, pretending to be serious, and sneered. You lied to me that you didn't leave anything behind. Have you forgotten? My father straightened his back and still maintained his domineering attitude. Then I will give Adam 25% of the shares. Is that enough? Then I will leave. I narrowed my eyes and sneered. Billions of dollars in shares? He actually thought he could manipulate me with just a few words. Why do you do that? Adam suddenly knelt down on one knee and looked at me pitifully. Lucas, brother, I'm sorry. I know my appearance has brought you a lot of pain, but please forgive me, okay? His father immediately reached out to help him up, his voice too gentle. Come on, Adam. You don't owe him anything. He is the unreasonable brother. Adam's face was pale, but there was a hint of provocative smile in his eyes. He still didn't stand up, but turned to look at Angela. I know you. You are his new lover, right? Adam pleaded, Please help me. I don't want to be the cause of their brotherly feud. Angela subconsciously took a step back. Her eyes swept over him coldly, and her voice was so soft, but it pierced Adam's heart like a knife. Aren't you tired of pretending to be pitiful? If you really feel guilty, disappear completely. This is a real apology. Adam was stunned in the place. The hypocritical expression on his face froze, as if he didn't expect to be mercilessly exposed by Angela. His eyes were red, tears rolled in the corners of his eyes, and he looked even more pitiful. But Angela just rolled her eyes, turned around, and hid behind me, obviously not wanting to continue paying attention to his tricks. I waved my hand and said coldly, That's enough, security. Take them out. Adam stood up, dragged his weak steps towards me, lowered his voice, and looked sinister. Lucas, how does it feel to be an unfaithful husband? Do you believe it? I can also let Angela climb into my bed like Anna did. As soon as I finished speaking, my sanity was instantly torn apart, and a volcanic rage erupted. Go to hell? I kicked him in the abdomen and knocked him to the ground. Adam curled up in pain, holding his stomach, and cold sweat rolled down his forehead. Didn't you keep saying you wanted to apologize? I squatted down and stared at him coldly. Okay, then kneel down and be serious. I raised my fist and punched him in the face. His skin was so thick that my palms went numb, but the anger in my heart finally subsided a little. Angela suddenly reached out and gently grasped my fist, trying to calm my anger with her small hand. She blew a breath and whispered, Stop hitting me, it's not worth it to hurt yourself. There was heartache in her eyes. I froze for a moment, lowered my fist, stood up, and looked at my father with a sneer. Take this card. I took out a black bank card from my pocket and threw it in front of my father. Either take the money and go abroad and never come back, or stay here and continue to protect your useless son until you die. I started counting down. 3, 2. My father's face turned from pale to purple. Finally, he gritted his teeth, bent down to pick up the card, and growled, You win. He pulled Adam up and walked out angrily. Adam struggled in disbelief. Dad, you can't do this. You promised not to abandon me. Get out. The security guard stepped forward and forcibly took Adam away. Only after they left completely did the company finally return to peace. Angela and I were the only ones left in the office. I leaned against my desk, looking at the empty door, feeling a deep sense of exhaustion. I was tired of the drama between Adam and his father, but this man was once a part of my life. Before my mother died, she held my hand and cried and said that her biggest regret in life was that she had loved the wrong person. My father did not attend her funeral and did not even shed a tear. He once told me that love was nothing but a shackle that made him stupid and weak. But now his so-called love has long been swallowed up by selfish desires. Lucas! Angela's little hand pulled my sleeve, interrupting my thoughts. Let's go to a barbecue tonight? Her eyes were gentle, with a little smile on her lips. It's my treat. I'll give you an extra bottle of beer. Looking at her serious, yet cute expression, I suddenly felt my heart filled with something. Okay. I nodded and showed a rare smile. Chapter 16. With Anna was once a passionate and chaotic one, but being with Angela gave me an unprecedented peace, as if the world finally had room to breathe. I found myself drawn to Angela's strange and endearing quirks. When it rains, even though there are two umbrellas, she would pretend that she can't find the other one, which makes me very angry, but I have to tilt the umbrella towards her and let half of my body get wet. While shopping, she suddenly frowned, rubbed her eyes, and muttered softly, "It seems like sand has gotten into my eyes and I can't see the road clearly." Then, she took the opportunity to take my hand and smiled like a successful little fox. Sometimes, she worked overtime until late at night and seemed to have all kinds of excuses. I forgot to back up my computer and I have to check it tonight. I need to organize the meeting minutes, otherwise I can't sleep. But I clearly saw that there was not a single meeting file open on her computer desktop. I didn't expose her, but just accompanied her silently, sitting together in the quiet office. Perhaps loving someone is like this. You will involuntarily get close to her, and even the slightest touch can make your heart beat uncontrollably. Every time her casual smile and the gentle warmth when touching the back of my hand always made my breath stop, like a boy in his first love, losing all the pretended calmness. However, there is always someone who breaks this beauty. After finishing my meal with foreign clients, I was surrounded by a group of reporters who had been waiting for a long time as soon as I walked out of the restaurant. Flash cameras flashed one after another, and their questions bombarded me like a barrage of bullets. Mr. Lucas, there are intimate photos of you and your new girlfriend circulating on the internet recently. Are they true? Is your wedding cancellation related to this new girlfriend? I raised my hand to signal them to calm down and patiently answered a few questions in an attempt to get rid of their pestering. However, at this moment, Anna and his bodyguards appeared. They forcibly cleared the crowd, while Anna stood beside the car, with no expression on her face behind her sunglasses. "Let's talk," she said coldly. The air in the car was like a compressed can, so stuffy that it was suffocating. She finally took off her sunglasses, revealing her red and swollen eyes. "Have you had enough fun? Forget it. I don't want to wait any longer." I leaned back in my chair, my expression calm. "Anna, we are different." Her lips trembled slightly, as if she wanted to laugh but couldn't. "It's been 10 years, Lucas. Are you really going to break your promise? You said you would marry me. You said you would protect me." "Stop." I looked out the window and said calmly, "You know what kind of person I am. I never play with feelings. But maybe we started on the wrong path from the beginning. My heart can only hold one person." I said, "Open the car door," and prepared to leave. Her hand suddenly grabbed mine. A tear slid down her cheek and fell on her leather jacket. "Can you please stop forcing my father's company? If my father goes bankrupt, our family will really have nothing. Please." I slowly pulled my hand away, my eyes cold. "I'm not making things difficult. If they want to cooperate, fair competition is enough." She let go of his hand, leaned back in her seat, gently wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, her face as pale as paper. When I got home, I stared at my phone countless times, but there was still no news from Angela. Anxiety gradually climbed up my heart, and finally, I grabbed my coat and prepared to go find her. When I opened the door, Anna was standing there staggering, reeking of alcohol with a dazed look in her eyes. "Honey, are you still angry? Come back. I'm willing to change everything as long as you come back. Get lost." I pushed her away irritably and tried to walk around her and leave. But she hugged my waist from behind, her voice hoarse and trembling. Don't go, Lucas. Maybe now Angela is already lying in Adam's bed. He is really good at seducing women. He is gifted. I froze, my rationality instantly shattered by her words. I turned around, raised my hand, and slapped her in the face. Where is she? Anna was hit so hard that she stood there in a daze, covering her face. Tears finally fell down, but she actually smiled. You hit me. Lucas, you actually hit me. She laughed crazier and crazier, her eyes mixed with despair and grievance. If Angela is like me, who would you choose? Her or me? I looked at her, and the anger in my heart gradually cooled down in her tears. I said nothing and turned away. Chapter 17. At this moment, panic was like a hand strangling my throat. I stepped on the accelerator. The wheels rolled over the asphalt road, and the harsh engine sound broke through the silent night. When I arrived at Adamus' apartment building, the scene in front of me made my blood boil. A group of thugs, tattooed, burly guys with predatory grins, scattered on the front steps of the building. They were standing there, as if they were waiting for me to come. I stopped the car, pushed open the door, glanced at them, and took out my checkbook with an expressionless face. How much? I'll give you 10 times the price and disappear immediately. My voice was low, but carried an irresistible force. The blonde, scarred leader walked forward slowly, a scornful smile on his face. Who the hell are you? Who do you think you are to act wild here? I'm too lazy to talk nonsense. Before I could finish my words, I rushed over and punched him in the face. Blood splattered, and the man staggered and fell to the ground. The others reacted and rushed towards me. These guys fought dirty, every punch going straight for the vitals, kicking me in the stomach and ribs, and I tasted blood in my mouth. But they underestimated me. After so many years of fighting training, I was able to find loopholes even in this chaos. I raised my fist, knocked one person down, and then turned around and kicked a thug who rushed over. Every time I threw a punch, I had only one thought in my mind. Angela, don't get hurt. I was breathing heavily, and my body was starting to go limp. In the chaos, I heard someone yell, "Police!" Then, a blue-white light flashed by, and the shrill sound of sirens got closer and closer. The thugs fled in panic, and my vision gradually blurred, and my consciousness drifted away as if falling into an abyss. When I opened my eyes again, the dazzling sunlight shone on my face through the curtains of the ward. Lucas, are you awake? I turned around and saw Angela sitting beside the bed. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red. It was obvious that she had been crying for a long time. Are you okay? She cried in her voice and tried to force a smile. I sat up and leaned against the bed railing. My throat was very dry. I'm fine. Angela shook her head violently, tears falling on the bed sheet. I'm sorry, my brother's people. They may have broken Adamus' leg. I frowned. Your brother? She quickly wiped the tears from her face and explained, he's not a bad guy. He's really not. He runs a legal business and has opened several music bars. He doesn't know you're my boyfriend. As she spoke, she took out a business card from her bag and said, he asked me to tell you that he owes you an apology. If you need help, you can call him. I took the business card and looked at the name printed on it. Tigray, the legendary name in the underground music world. I ruffled her hair and said in a softer tone, it's okay, as long as you're okay. Are you okay? A gloomy voice came from the door. I looked up and saw Anna standing there, wearing a black windbreaker, standing elegantly but exhausted. She looked at me for a long time and finally walked over slowly, with an inexplicable calmness on her face. Lucas, you've waited for me for 10 years, she said softly. Then I can wait for you too. If you're tired, come back. Angela grabbed my hand suddenly with a hint of anger in her voice. Dream on. I looked down at Angela's slightly pouting lips, and suddenly an indescribable warmth surged in my heart. I looked up to meet Anna's gaze, and my voice was firm and calm. I won't get tired. I will avoid all temptations and love her endlessly, over and over again. Anna was slightly startled, and the self-deprecating smile on her face became more obvious. Really? Then wait and see. She turned and left, her black windbreaker casting a shadow in the sunlight. I held Angela's hand tightly and felt her slightly trembling fingertips. But that night, while my assistant was investigating the information, he brought me a piece of news that was enough to make me angry. 5 years ago, Anna went to study abroad. We had just gotten engaged at that time, and she had a good reason. to study abroad and lay a good foundation for our future. I did not stop her, but just smiled and sent her away. But now I know that she not only went abroad to study, but also gave birth to a child there, my brother Adam's child. My eyes turned cold, my fingers tightened unconsciously, and my knuckles turned white. The child is now being raised by Adam's distant relatives. They live in the suburbs, so low-key that they are almost unnoticed by outsiders. Adam and Anna's plan was to stabilize me first, obtain the property from me, and then when the time was right, bring the child back and take over the assets under my name in a legitimate manner. That night, I leaned against the window, looking at the city lights, and Anna's smug and arrogant expression and Adam's pretentious and cowardly face kept flashing in my mind. How dare they use me so and scrupulously? In the morning, I sent people to a foreign country to investigate the child's living conditions and collect evidence. Adam obviously underestimated me, and his so-called cover-up was just talk. 2 days later, my assistant brought back photos and videos. In the photos, a 4-year-old boy stood in the yard. His facial features were exactly the same as Adam's, but the curve of his lips had a hint of Anna's stubbornness. His name is Noah, the assistant reported softly. They are raising him, but the child doesn't seem to know who his parents are. I heard that Adam's relatives are very poor, and they have begun to hint to Anna that they need money for child support. What's even more hateful is that my father and stepmother have always known about the existence of this child, and they would secretly visit this so-called grandson, who is my family. The father I once loved the most could ignore me, his biological son, for the sake of the son born to another woman. If my mother had not transferred the shares to me before she died, I think I would have been kicked out of the house by now. I sneered, anger boiling in my heart. Did they really think of me as a prey to be slaughtered? Chapter 18. Not long after, the day Adam was sent to prison, he was sitting in a wheelchair with his usual pitiful look on his face, but the hatred in his eyes almost overflowed. I went there, stood in front of him, and looked at his pale and distorted face through the cold visiting glass. Lucas, he gritted his teeth and squeezed out my name with a vicious tone in his voice. Your father has never loved you, and the women you have never loved you either. Do you know that? You are just unloved trash. A complete joke. He stared at me, his eyes bloodshot. When I get out, I will make you understand that the life you stole from me is rightfully mine. I looked at him and smiled expressionlessly, a smile that even had a hint of relief. Adam, you should try to exercise, I whispered. No one will sympathize with you if you look so fragile. I see that you like garbage. You cherish things that I don't want so much. He completely lost his mind, started swearing at the broken glass, and slapped the armrests of the wheelchair with his hands, as if he was trying to break free of some invisible shackles. The more he did this, the calmer my heart became. He should understand that in the days ahead, no matter how angry he is, the difficulties he will face will not be any less. When I walked out of the prison, the sunlight outside was dazzling, as if it had filled the whole world with bright light. And there, Angela was standing next to the car. She was wearing a light yellow dress, and her hair was casually tied into a small bun. The sunlight fell on her face, making her look like she had walked out of a dream. When she saw me, she suddenly waved her hands and jumped up like an excited little rabbit. I was stunned for a moment, then I laughed. My pace unconsciously quickened, getting faster and faster until I just started running. She smiled and took a half step back, catching my open arms as I ran. I held her in my arms and felt her soft body against my chest. She looked up at me with a sweet smile on her face. Why are you running? I can't walk. I lowered my head, moved closer to her, and whispered, I just want to hold you and make sure you are real. In this complex and cold world, we have been wandering around, losing, doubting, and struggling. To love and to be loved may be the most important things in life. But to meet someone you love deeply and who also loves you deeply, sharing the same values, trust, and future, is the salvation given by fate. I hugged Angela tightly, and a corner of my heart seemed to be filled, and all the pain and gloom were driven away by her. She is my salvation,